sa labas ng imbitahan ako. Sakto may papel ako. So, at syempre sa lahat ng mga kritiko na binabasa ko mula ng bata hanggang ngayon. Hindi mapang-away to. So, yung papel ko ay pinaikli ko ng pinaikli para kumasya sa 15 minutos. So, basically, it is a call for a return for Marxism, field studies. So, krisis at kritisismo. So, simulan ko sa isang city. So, what matters therefore is not trying to establish once and for all which theory is right and which is a load of shit, but only whether or not to continue on the swings and roundabouts of thinking. So sinabi yan ni Malarkey, isang British film scholar. So upang magsilbing giya ng diskusyon, nais kong simulan ng maigling panayam na ito sa pagbabalik tanaw sa isang CP na hango sa sanaysay na ang kritika sa panahon ng krisis ng batikang kritiko na si Epifanio San Juan Jr. Anya ukol sa ugnayan ng krisis at kritisismo. Sa gitna ng permanenteng krisis ng sambayanan, ng laganap na karukhaan at paghihikahos ng nakararami, sa harap ng matinding kahirapan ng mga manggagawa at pesante, ng mga biktima ng militarismo at low-intensity warfare, ng mga may kapangyarihan, at sa patuloy na pagsasamantala at panunupil ng mga dayuhan, may tatanong natin, hindi ba't isang kalabisang luho ang papuri nating ginagawa para sa ilang libro? Ano ang silbi ng sining sa harap ng nakaririmaring na kalagayan ng hindi siguro makakabasa ng kahit isang libro may tatanghal dito? Ano ang katuturan ng proseso ng pagkilatis, panunuri, at pagpapahalagang nakapaloob sa pagkakataong ito? So, sinulat ito para sa Manila Critics Circle noong 1988. Bagamat tungkol sa libro ang tinutukoy ni Professor San Juan, mahalagang isipin natin na sa kalagayan din ng sine, paano may ugnay ang kritisismo sine sa pangangailangan ng lipunan. So, 26 na taon lang nakalipas mula ng basahin ng naturang kritiko ang kanyang sanaysay. Subalit tila patuloy na lumalala pa rin ang mga krisis panlipunan gaya ng patuloy na pagtataas ng bahagdan ng mahihirap dahil na din sa mga huwad na polisiya ng kaunlaran, kawalang akses ng nakararami sa mga batayang serbisyong panlipunan, nariyan din ang banta ng privatisasyon at komersalisasyon ng sistema ng edukasyon, pagtaas ng kaso ng paglabag sa karapatang pantao sa syudad at kanayunan, paglako ng lakas paggawa sa pandaigdigan ng marketo, patuloy na pambubusapos sa kababaihan at sa mga pangkulturang komunidad, banta ng US bases muli, at ang isang medyang popular na walang alinlangang dumadambana at sumasamba sa lohika ng kapital. At sa lahat ng ito, ang tanong na nag-uusig ay kanino dapat umapanig ang kritiko at kanyang kritika. Matindi ang responsibilidad na nakaatang at kailangan pagpuin ng isang kritiko, lalo na't masidhi ang pangangailangan upang magkaroon ng interbensyon at pagposisyon upang mabuyangyang ang mga kontradiksyon at mga nakakupling ideolohiya at puwersa na masasalat sa tekstong kanyang sinusuri. Ngunit sa kasalukuyang panahon ng panunood ng neoliberal na mga pangangatwiran at kaisipan sa mismong muog ng akademya, tila mismong ang kritiko na imbis na siyang sumasawata sa krisis ang nasa kalagayan at bingit ng krisis, kung kaya't ito muna ang ating pag-usapan. Sa paglipana ng mga teoretikal na posisyon na iniluwa ng neoliberal na katangian ng edukasyon gaya ng pabulusok na pagbabalik ng positivismo, cognitivism sa pag-aaral ng media, o ang pagyapong ng pluralismo, end of ideology, post-history, post-theory, o postmodernism, at kung ano-ano pa mga bagong kaisipang uso, ngunit tahasang mapangalim, ay hindi may tatatwang na sa pakura na natin ng mga kaisipang umangat-ngat at umabansot sa pag-iral ng ating mapanguring kamalayan. Sa unang malas ay gagandang mga pakinggan at tila may bahid ng kontra-diskursibong posisyon, ngunit sa ikalawang tingin ay tunay na mga ampaw at mga kanluraning sa lamang kalamang ito para higit na mailayo ang kritiko at akademiko ng ikatlong daigdig sa pakikipag-uno at pakikipagtalaban upang maunawaan ang danas ng kanyang bayan at makapagbigay preskripsyon upos sa kung ano ang makabuluhang sining. Hindi makakailangang may ilang mga kritiko sa kasalukuyan na nagbumuwalan sa mga kaisipang makabago, mga teoryang nakakabasag dahinga at mga kaisipang hugot at hindi lapat sa lupa, kung kaya't kung papasuriin ang kanilang mga akday, tila mga hukag lamang na haka. Lahat ay nakalutang lamang sa dambana ng mataas na teorya, ngunit sa katotohanan ay mga mapuron na teoretisasyon at ilusoryong posisyon na said sa sustansya. Hindi rin natin dapat talikuran ang katotohanan may ilang mga kritiko sa esfera ng akademya na matagal nang isinangla, ipinrenta at ibinenta ang kanilang panulat kasama ang kanilang paninindigan para sa interes ng yayaring kaayusan, partikular sa interes ng Estado, mga institusyon at negosyo. Sila yung mga mahilig magsulat ng mga praise review, ang mga pen for hire, silang mga walang gulugot at mga kawal ng may kapangyarihan at ilan. Sa kabilang banda rin naman, ginagamit ng ilang kritiko ang mga sulong na kaisipan at kritikal na formulasyon, hindi para gawing pwersa para himukin ang nagbabantang lakas ng isang tabi, ngunit upang gawing sangkalan ang danas ng nakararami sa kanilang mga pretesyosong uri ng scholarship at upang magsilbi lamang na tungtungang bato sa patuloy na pagtaas ng kanilang simbolikong kapital sa hierarkiya ng akademya nang sa gayon marating ang tuktok ng toring galing kasama ang ilang panglulong sa droga ng kapangyarihan. Mula sa tuktok, tinatanaw na lamang nila sa ibaba ang naghihikahos na sambayanan. Marami ring nagre-review sa social media, pero huwag na nating pag-usapan yon. Sa kaso naman ng mga kritikong piniling pag-aralan ng kulturang popular, kung saan nakasupok ang larang ng media gaya ng radyo, telebisyon, bagong media at sine halimbawa, mahalagang inihistro na may ambag ang mga paniniyasat na ito upang mabalasa ang mga nag-uupugang puwersa ng kapangyarihan sa mga lunang ito na dati-rati hindi itinuturing na lehitimong sangay ng makabuluhang scholarship. Ngunit may bitag din rito. Kadalasan ang mga pag-aaral, bagamat may kaakibat na potensyal, ay nalilihis na lamang sa mga maninipis na panunuring umawaglit sa mga batayang isyu na kinakaharap ng lipunang Pilipino. Imbis na mas na maging sanalayang prinsipyo, halimbawa ang talapan ng uri at dialectical na ugnayan nito sa kasarian at seksualidad, sa pag-aaral halimbawa ng mga gay films ng indie cinema, nalilimita na lamang sa usapin ng empowerment, camp, postmodernong identidad, queerness, homosexuality ang atake. Walang masama doon, ngunit may kakulangan. May kakulangan ng pagposisyon, ang pagsusuri, para higit na may angkop sa upungan ng uri na siyang sanalayang problema ng lipunan. Maganda ang pananaw rito ng Ingles na Marxistang si Annie Eagleton. Among students of culture, the body is an immensely fashionable topic, but it is usually the erotic body, not the famish. There is a keen interest in coupling bodies, but not in laboring ones. While bespoken middle-class students huddle diligently in libraries at work on sensationalist subjects like vampirism, eye gouging, cyborgs, and porno movies, intellectual matters are no longer an ivory tower affair, but belong to the world of media and shopping malls, bedrooms, and brothels. As such, they rejoin everyday life, but only at the risk of losing their ability to subject it to critique. Sa larangan naman ng kritika ng sine, may ilan pa ding hindi makaalagwa sa pag-aaral dito bilang isang anyo lamang ng audiovisual na sining. Nais ko'y giit na hindi masamang maging maalam sa formal na katangian ng sine bilang larangan ng sining at media na may tiyak na wika rin ng pananagisag gaya ng naratibo, tunggalian, tunog, karakterisasyon, mise-en-scène, ilaw, sinematografiya at editing. Mahalagang pag-aralan ng mga ito, ngunit kung ang pagdawdaw ng kritika ay nakasagka lamang sa limitadong lente ng formalismo, tiyak na hindi mahihigit ang bisa at hiwaga ng sine bilang aparatong ideolohikal. Ang karamihan din naman ng sumusuong sa kritika ng sine ay humaling pa din sa opyo at interpretatibong bertud ng semiotika, ngunit paratihang nakakaligtaang higitin ang potensyal ng teoryang winawasiwas. Salat sa paghistorisa, salat sa kontekstualisasyon, salat sa diwang mapalalim pa ang pag-aaral labas sa konstelasyon ng mga senyas. Halimbawa lang ito ng mga kritikang nagpapalabnaw sa dapat sanay nakapanlalaslas na uri ng kritisismo. Ang larangan ng kritika at mga kritiko ay kasalukuyan at sa kasalukuyan ay nasa krisis gaya ng sambayanang kinapag-ooban nating lahat. Nasa krisis sapagkat hindi na nagkakapisa ang kritika kung ano ang sanay lugar nito sa lipunan. Nasa krisis sapagkat lulungan na ang karamihan sa mga kritiko sa mga kaisipang patuloy na nagdidepolitisa at nagdidisarma sa kanilang panulat. Nasa krisis sapagkat ang ilan sa mga nagtatambana sa kanilang mga sarili bilang kritiko ay nakatira sa bahay na salamin kung saan narsisismo ang himno. Nasa krisis sapagkat winawaglit na ng kritiko na ang kritika ay kailangan ihagkis dahil may gustong baguhin sa sining at lipunan. Nasa krisis sapagkat karamihan sa mga kritiko ngayon ay hiniheri na lamang ng postmodernong skeptisismo kung kaya't pagbuwag lamang ang intensyon ng panunuri at hindi muling pagbubuo. Nasa krisis sapagkat nahumaling na lamang sa pag-aaral kay Lady Gaga, sa bromance, sa ilusoryong kapangyarihan ng social network halimbawa, imbis na siyasatin ang kompleksidad ng mga tunggalian na tunay nararamdaman ng lipunang Pilipino. Nasa krisis sapagkat malayo na sa pangangailangan ng sambayanan ang mga kritika. Nasa krisis sapagkat winawaglit o para nasa ilan ay inabando na ang makauring pagsusuri. Nasa krisis sapagkat naaalibad para na sa Marxismo. Ang usapin ng kritisismo at sinding na kritika ay walang pagdududa na pagpili ng panig. Ito ay isang politikal na gawain. Sa ganang akin, kinakailangan ihagkis muli ang makauring pagsusuri sa kritika ng mga tekstong kultural gaya ng larangan ng sining Pilipino upang mailantad ang banggaan ng mga interes at didgitan ng mga pwersa sa kultural na parang na ito. Ika nga ng film scholar na si Mike Wayne, film and Marxism share at least one thing in common. They are both interested in the masses. Sa konteksto ng ating bayan bilang ikatlong daigdig na nakasukob sa pwersa ng nangyayaring kapangyarihan ng ilan, mahalagang masalat kung sa paanong paraan nanunood sa mundo ng sine, mapa-Hollywood man, mapa-komersyal, mapa-indie, mapa-alternatibo, wala. Ang mga intelektual pwersa patuloy na bumabansot sa pag-iral at pag-alagwa ng hanay ng marhilisano. Ang larang ng sine ay hawak at gumagana batay sa makina ng kapital, mga aparat, kundi man ng Estado at kumisa ng tambalan ng Estado at mga korporasyon, gaya sa indie film. Diba? Kinakailangan muling ilangkapan at baling muli ang tuon sa diskurso ng uri at ideological critique para higit pang maunawaan ang kompleksidad ng usapin ng identidad, diaspora, urbanisasyon, body politics, pugpungan ng oras at lunan, globalisasyon at kasaysayan. Ang pagbalik at muling paglangkap ng makauring panunuri sa sining Pilipino at mga tekstong pangkultural sa pangkalahatan ay higit na makapagbibigay tinig sa mga winaglitan nito at patuloy na winawaglitan. Sa aking palagay, mahalagang salalayang panindigang teoretikal at imperatibo ng kritika, paglikha ng sining at pagkilos ang lagusang ginawa ng Marxismo, partikular ang diin sa uri, dialektika, imperialismo at ideolohiya. Bilang panghuli, nais kong sipihin sa kabuuan ang sinabi ni Mike Wayne ukol sa Marxism and criticism. Sabi niya, what is it that Marxism offers film studies? It offers, I think, a remarkably rich tradition of analysis and debates central to understanding an industrial cultural form such as film. Marxism raised questions at every level of the social order without necessarily collapsing into reductionism. Marxism demands that we historicize everything rather than taking it to be a natural, immutable fact. It provides the tools with which scholars can self-reflexively critique their own position within the class structure and wonder how that position inevitably leads to unthinking internalization of dominant practices. Marxism's historization refers not only to the past and present, but to the future as well. Marxism allows us to think beyond the now. Its sensitivity to utopian currents within cultural practices and technologies, as well as resistance and contradiction, helps us glimpse the prefiguring of alternative ways of living and loving which are today so urgently needed. Mahalagang ihagkis muli ang makauring panunuri para ipamalas na hindi kailanman na iwawalay sa usapin ng ekonomiya at politika ang espera ng kultura. Muog ng aking kritisismo ang saligang politisasyon ng Marxismo sapagkat naniniwala ako sa bisa ng tiwalang ito, hindi lamang para mailapit ang kritika sa bayan, kundi para mas mailapit ang kritiko sa hanay at digmaan ng mga ninapastangan. Sa salita nga ng Italianong Marxista na si Gramsci, ang pakikibaka para sa moral at intelektual na pamumuno sa esfera ng kultura ay pakikibaka para makamit ang hegemonya. Kung kaya't kinakailangan higitin natin ang radikal na potensyal na pag-aaral sa sine, kultura at lipunan para tiyak na makakamit ang pambansang pagbabago sa parang ng kultura at sa di nalalayong parang kung saan mas makatao at makatarungan ang buhay ng mamamayan, kung saan ang sining at lipunan ay tunay na para sa masa, sapagkat bilang mga kritiko, kailangan muli nating umibig lagpas sa sariling. Salamat.
Susunod po natin na magsasalita ay si Dr.
Title ng aking papel ay Critiquing the Philippine Today. What I want to do is just describe one productive way, what I think is productive way of critiquing the Filipino film in our day, and this is more or less what I try to do, to highlight the elements of this type of film criticism and present what I believe are the tasks and challenges facing film critics today. First off, a definition. I've always used this definition of film criticism because I think it is something that is accepted by almost everyone, and I think it goes to the heart of the matter. Film criticism is the analysis and evaluation of a given film, which seeks to provide audiences with a deeper understanding of said film. The elements here are the divisions in the paper. First, yung analysis of film. Analysis seeks to explain the content and form of film on its own terms, clarifying whether it succeeds or fails in what it wants to do. Analysis would try to answer questions like, what are the major themes of the film? How does the filmmaker structure reality so that these themes will be developed through the film narrative? What point of view is employed throughout the film and why? How are the plastics of the image, the actors, sets, location, costumes, props, and lighting, and the sounds, including dialogue and other diegetic sounds, orchestrated to create the mise-en-scène of specific scene sequences. And last, how are the scenes shot by the camera, and how are these shots edited to ardent title? To illustrate, analysis of the film service with Brillante Mendoza should show how the film is able to harness the elements of cinema in order to express and elaborate on its major theme, the deterioration of the Pineda family members and the relations between them. In the space of one day, each of the protagonists suffers a setback or undergoes an incident that causes further erosion of their characters. Nanay Flor loses the bigamy case that she filed against her husband. In court, her own children testify that their father does not have a second family, so that the second family will not be eligible to claim any part of the father's inheritance. Naida imperils her marriage by openly showing her attraction to her ne'er-do-well cousin who works as a theater projectionist. Naida's husband realizes for the first time that his marriage is a trap. Alan, Naida's cousin, decides to run away from his responsibility to Merly, whom he has impregnated. The screening of bomba films and the sexual transactions between gays continue inside the movie house, even as the procession of Good Friday wends its way around the theater building. Opting for the style of neorealism, the film sets its story in the actual family theater from where the film stories have been derived. Here, family members live in separate rooms whose distances from each other symbolize the alienation between the family members themselves. Acting strikes us as undramatic, natural, matter-of-fact even, but it is truly expressive and consistent with character. There are no costumes, only everyday clothes that characters of this class would wear. Much of the film is shot with a meandering camera that represents the point of view of characters as they go up and down the theater's maze of stairs, even as it captures the flux of life in real time. The live sound reproduces the external noises, including the beep of jeepneys and boom of tricycles, which sometimes almost drown out the dialogue. The sound pollution from the outside is meant to parallel the pollution inside the theater, both the physical stench of the toilets and the quote-unquote moral filth inside the screening room. Editing is mainly invisible and generally minimal in order to preserve the rhythm of real time. Aside from illustrating the internal coherence or lack thereof of a cinematic work, analysis may also try to explain how the film got to be what it is. In this regard, questions regarding the economic, political, social conditions under which the film was made, as well as the artistic circumstances, influences, and styles which shaped the film become relevant. These questions would include the following for a film like Service. What is the mode of production of an indie film that like Service as opposed to that of the mainstream film? How does the production cost impact on the filmmaker's freedom to choose the subject matter and the way he wants to shoot his film? How was it possible to create a bold and cutting-edge film like Service in 2008? What is the filmmaking style proposed by Bing Lau's found story, and how did it shape Service? That's the analysis. Second would be the evaluation. The evaluation of a film highlights the significance of the content and form of a given film. The key word is significance. Content would include the ideas and values embedded or animating the narrative and its characters. Form would include the genre, either action, drama, comedy, horror, and fantasy, or bomba, or the indie style, neorealism, social epic, personal meditation, among others, that has been used in the film. Let us look at the evaluation of content. The significance of certain films is rooted in the fact that they pioneered in the presentation of certain ideas or values at specific periods in our history. The evaluation of such films, therefore, can focus on and develop the film's achievement in this regard, but it must also examine the weaknesses or limitations of the ideas presented. Allow me to cite some examples of films which have become significant in our history for the ideas that they propounded. Number one, Bayaning Third World, 1999, is the first film to question the heroism of Jose Rizal at the time of the centennial celebrations, when movies like Jose Rizal that continued to venerate the hero as the unquestioned center and source of Philippine nationalism. However, even as the film deconstructs the heroism of the national hero by showing his rejection of the revolution and his possible retraction, the film nonetheless ends by saying that if we have doubts about his heroism, those doubts will be dispelled when we read Rizal's works, which ironically are the very works that embody his lack of confidence in a revolution from below. Sister Stella L. 1984 is the first film to expose the economic exploitation of workers and the salvaging of labor leaders, as well as the politicization of the religious and the censorship of the press during the period of martial law. After being gagged for more than a decade of restrictive censorship and terrorized by the ubiquitous military, filmmakers began to organize and protest against arbitrary and unreasonable censorship in the early 1980s, becoming even more militant and aggressive under the banner of the Concerned Artists of the Philippines after the Aquino assassination in 1983, even as the anti-Marcos movement spread rapidly to all classes. Both Jose Lacaba and his co-writers and the director Mike De Leon were members of the CAP, and the film was made with the help and support of the Burgese elements that turned against the dictatorship. Sister Stella L. was later followed by Bayan Ko, which was also significant for daring to depict the Lakbayan March and the singing of the anthem of protest, Bayan Ko, which the BRMPT under Maria Caro Catibak tried to censor. Prof brought the case to the Supreme Court, which ruled that the BRMPT could only classify, not censor, films. This decision in turn forced Marcos to replace the BRMPT with a more quote-unquote liberal MTRCB in 1985. The film Bata Bata, Paano Ka Ginawa, 1998, is significant for being the first film that directly tackled, from the point of view of women, women's issues like wife battery, abandonment by husbands, prejudices against separated women or single mothers or working mothers, and the first film to have as heroine a woman who struggles, not always successfully, to perform her work as employee in a women's crisis center and her job as mother of two and live-in partner of a macho mama's boy. Unlike many women's films that end up by endorsing the traditional roles of women as obedient wife and dutiful mother, the film holds up the far from ideal but loving and rights advocate Leia as a heroine for our times. One should point out, however, that for reasons known only to the writer and the director, one whole side of Leia, that of political activists in the novel, who would join demonstrations against the Marcos dictatorship, was edited out in the movie, removing thereby an important arena in the women's movement. Maximo Oliveros is a very significant film because it is the first gay feature film that shows the gay not as an object of derision or as a victim of macho chauvinism, but as a boy accepted by his family and friends, and one who in the end shows willingness to transcend the dehumanizing effects of poverty by educating himself. Departing from Dolphy movies where gayness is considered as a sickness, not a sexuality, that should be cured and can be cured by finding the right woman for the gay man, Maximo presents gayness as a fact of life, a kind of sexual persuasion that need not be changed nor repressed. Here, the gay boy chooses his love over his family because his family has committed a wrong. But when his beloved policeman becomes accessory to the murder of Maximo's father, Maximo in turn rejects him and comes out a better and more confident person after all the tragedies that beset him. Anak Manwa is the first Pangasinan film in the sense that it is made by a native of Pangasinan and it uses Pangasinan language throughout the film. The persona of the film, a balikbayan who rediscovers his Pangasinan roots, visits the different places of his childhood and the different landmarks of Pangasinan, and the places that are famous for the manufacture of famous Pangasinan products, like native bagoong, bolo and knives, and pottery. Outstanding is the cinematography of the film, which heightens the poetry of the subject matter and the narration. It should be pointed out, however, that even as the film highlights the achievements of one region and encourages the younger generations not to forget their language and culture, it also discourages the youth from learning or speaking the national language, because it is not their native tongue. The film thus falls into the trap of nativism, wanting to go back to an idyllic rural period, as well as regionalism, the refusal to be integrated to a larger nation, to the Filipino language. Form. The significance of other films may be attributed to their innovative use of cinematic forms or styles, which opened up new possibilities for the communication of new ideas. Allow me to give some examples of films that are significant for their novel and imaginative use of form in the service of their chosen content. Tuhog by Jeffrey Turian, 2000, exemplifies how an exploitative genre like bomba can be used to subvert itself and expose its predatory nature and ways. The film is about a mother and daughter who are sexually molested by the same man, the mother's father and the daughter's grandfather. A film producer and writer offer them money to use their story for a film. They say to give them justice, the justice they deserve. But the finished film discusses both mother and daughter because here they are depicted as sex-obsessed females who welcome the sexual advances of the old man. But even as the film uses the genre and conventions of the bomba, it is careful not to dwell on nude bodies to avoid titillation of the audience. The camera shots and direction effectively distance the audience from the scenes, encouraging them to reflect on the contradictions that are playing out on screen. Aguila by Eddie Romero is an important film because it rides on the popularity of Fernando Poe Jr. in the action film in order to dramatize its historical epic, showing the transformation of Philippine society from the period of 1896 to the period of the 1970s. A cinema of ideas, Aguila traces the changes in 4 generations of the Aguila family and their involvement in the issues of their times. Betrayal of the revolution by the Estrados, connivance between the politicians and the local leaders in the despoliation of lands in Mindanao, the suppression of the Sakdal uprising of the American period, the ideological conflict between Hawks and Americans after the liberation, the tragic involvement of one son in the Korean War, the corrupt elections of the 1950s, the imposition of martial law, and the rise of activism in the 1970s. Although FPJ refused to give up his low waist pants and his long sideburns, the film nonetheless succeeded in transforming the action film into a film of social ideas. Another successful transformation of genre is typified by Bata Bata, Paano Ka Ginawa. Billing itself as a melodrama about family relationships, the film was able to attract the traditional audiences of melodrama, the women, who are the primary targets of the messages of the film. But even as the audiences identified with usual dramatic confrontations and sampalan and tear-jerking situations of the melodrama, the They were also introduced to characters who were no longer black and white, but individual and real like themselves, living in or reacting to situations that were familiar and credible. A film that is significant for creating a form that cannot be aligned with any of the genres and can only be considered on its own terms is Bayaning Third World. With no real story to speak of, the film's narrative follows the ups and downs of a director and writer who are researching in order to make a film about Rizal. Interestingly, the research process of the collection of data is dramatized, with the researchers in contemporary clothes entering the houses of the past, where the research interviewees live. At one point towards the end, the film space of the past connects to the film space of the present. The film is shot in black and white so that the viewer will find it easier to maintain a distance from the film, a distance that will encourage him to think about the issues being raised by the film. Last, an achievement that could have only been done because of the new DV cameras is Ang Damgo and Eleuteria. This is the first Filipino film shot in one continuous long take that chronicles the last hours of Eleuteria in Cebu before she embarks on her trip to Germany as a mail-order bride. From behind, in front, or from the side, the camera documents how her parents fetch her from the river, force her to dress up, how she listens to her cousin who is married to a German, how she meets up with a village idiot who is trying to plant a banana tree in the water, and then later with her boyfriend who tries unsuccessfully to spirit her away, how she arrives at the port and says a bitter goodbye. The new technology has allowed the filmmaker to document life as it is lived and as it flows in real time, with all its vagaries, intrusions, and unpredictabilities. In evaluating the content and form of a film, I use very specific standards. In general, I would endorse films that critically portray important realities in our society in whatever style. You don't need to use neorealism to portray the realities of our society. But at the same time have messages which are liberative and transformative and conducive to the protection of the rights of all Filipinos and the creation of an egalitarian nation. I also would endorse films that highlight innovation, experimentation, and transformation of cinematic forms so that they become worthy vehicles of new and progressive ideas. On the other hand, I do not endorse films that in any way discriminate against or exploit anyone, or propagate ideas that are elitist, colonial, or patriarchal. If you notice, I have ceased to use the criterion of Filipino-ness when judging a film, because Filipino-ness, to begin with, raises more questions than answers. And second, because being Filipino is very often associated with many ideas and values which may be age-old and traditional, but may be authoritarian and violative of human rights. Lastly, the tasks and challenges for the critic of our time. The critic is a product of his background, which will be the source of both his strengths and his weaknesses. No? But he should be, wherever he comes from, be equipped with enough knowledge and skills to do film criticism. That knowledge and skill should be the product of a continuing education, which should include the following. An appreciation of the language of film. Film is a specific art form that uses the camera, which has its own cinematographic language. If you notice, the first writings of the Manonuri tended to focus on the content or the theme of films, but hardly on the technical aspects of filmic expression. And the reason is because most of us did not know the language of film when we started to write. It was only much later, with exposure to films, and of course, academic studies on film, that we began to appreciate that other aspect of it. But it is impossible to analyze the content and form of a film without knowing the language of film. Also needed is a knowledge of the history of the Filipino film, because you cannot show the significance of a film that is doing something new if you don't know what came before it. As well as familiarity with Philippine history, of course, because of the content of the films. 3, there should also be, in the critic, an appreciation of film as cultural artifact. In other words, it is product of a culture, as well as a social catalyst. So, for me, the importance of the study of film is precisely because film is a popular medium that is able to communicate ideas and is able to shape the consciousness of its viewers. Fourth, there should be a familiarity with the theories that analyze the social and political significance of film. I know that there are a lot of reactions binanggit na about grand theory, but I still believe that theories that we study are able, some of them are applicable to our own situation because they call attention to certain aspects of our society that should be changed. So theories of Marxism and feminism, for example, are important theories in the understanding of our own society. I do not believe in the stand of pantayong pananaw that we should only use theories that come from ourselves. Right? I think that is much too narrow-minded. Number 5, a critical language that is sincerely interested in communicating with the audience, that is free of theoretical jargon and pedantic language. I think